quilting tutorial, I'm going to show you why colorful batiks make a perfect background for embroidered quilting projects. You'll see how you can use Hoffman California Fabric's 1895 watercolor collection for any embroidered background. Hi there, my name is Brenda and I'm the creator of the pattern line known as Among Brenda's Quilts. And together with my friends at Hoffman California Fabrics, we present to you a new idea on how to use the 1895 Valley Watercolor Collection. Embroidery on batik is a new notion for lots of us. It's a fabulous idea, especially when combined with Valley hand paints in a pieced and embroidered quilt. The extra thread count in batik is perfect for embroidery, allowing for extra detail and accuracy. That's because the more threads you have in your background fabric, the more insertion spots you have for your embroidery needle. Batiks needle beautifully. Stitching through batiks is like stitching through butter. If you have a sore wrist from time to time, batik will present no problem with needle resistance. It just goes through beautifully. Now I'm just going to show you the difference, and you probably are aware of this, between some of the muslins or overprints that you might have previously used for embroidery and batik. So here we have a muslin, and I don't know if you can see this or not, but of course it has a very low thread count, so you're not going to get a whole lot of detail with that kind of a fabric. Plus it's very, very thin. With an overprint, you've got actual white dye over white fabric. So this sits on top of your fabric and does create needle resistance. So that's going to be a little bit harder to stitch through. Plus you've got a fairly low thread count again. The batiks, on the other hand, are beautifully woven, very tightly. They're great quality, and you're going to get all kinds of detail. And we're just going to go over to a quilt and I'll show you what can be achieved. For instance, here we've got a lovely little face, very detailed, done with one strand of floss, but it turns out very nicely. You're not losing the look of a face when you're stitching on batik, which can often be a problem. And in this house, you see we've got some lovely detail with a bit of gingerbread and the house panes. And again, that's no problem when stitched on batik. Why be limited to just a few color options for your stitchery background? Traditionally, white and ecru fabrics, muslin, or tone-on-tone fabrics have been used in embroidery. Hoffman's 1895 Valley Watercolor Collection includes numerous shades, tones, tints, and values that make subtle and effective backgrounds. These modeled watercolors give new depth to your embroidery work. Use beiges with hints of yellow, gold, or orange to give your background a really nice warm look. You'll find about a dozen variations on just the color beige in the Hoffman Watercolor Collection. And there's a full range of light pinks, purples, blues, greens, and other pastels. Use deeper colors when stitching with white embroidery floss for a striking look. Or you might try using the wrong side of the watercolor batiks for an extremely subtle texture. Here's pretzel, gardenia, buttercream. Here's aspen and sand dollar. Sand dollar is a personal favorite. Here's sandy and tortilla. You're going to find that there's just a lot more life in a batik background. This 42 by 60 lap or wall quilt is called Angels Watching Over Me. In this red version, I've used number 500 gardenia for the background. It's got a warm yellowy look that works well with the reds and blues in the rest of the quilt. The 5 assorted reds, the blues, and the 5 assorted beiges are all from the 1895 collection. Here's another color version of Angels Watching Over Me in grays and in browns. The background color is number 501, Sand Dollar. I love Sand Dollar because it has a bit of an orangey cast that gives the quilt lots of life. Pattern Valley batiks are used for the simple Ohio Star setting in this brown and gray version. All fabrics used for either colorway of the quilt are listed on page 8 of the pattern. The top panel of Angels Watching Over Me shows an angel flying through sun-striped clouds with several Canada geese leading the way. The center panel reveals a family farm below. There's an angel in the sleigh, and she's bringing good news to the mailbox at this country home. Tracks lead from the house to the pond, where one of the kids has found an angel snowman. The other little fellow in the lower panel thinks he's skating on his own, but he's getting a heavenly helping hand, and a sweet little jackrabbit watches the scene from the bottom right. The Angels Watching Over Me quilt is not heavily embroidered, and so it finishes up in a very reasonable amount of time. I've used DMC floss. You might try variegated floss for another look. Most of the stitching is done with a backstitch using 1 or 2 strands of floss. When stitching on any fabric, it's a good idea to line your background fabric. With lining in place, you can carry your floss from one area to another without the worry that the carry thread will shadow through the front of your work. I've done that right here, between these marks. Floss carried over a short distance makes for faster work with less stopping and starting. And if you knot your thread ends rather than weave them in, your knots and tails don't show either at the front. I'm a bit lazy with my floss ends, so lining really works for me. So what do you use for lining? Well, you might use another piece of the same batik that you used for your background. You could use pre-shrunken muslin like I have here. Either of these choices are basted to your background fabric. Or you might use an iron-on lining like Pellon Shape Flex 101. It's got adhesive on one side. I always use a lining that works together with the kind of marking tools you're using. For instance, if you trace your design using blue soluble markers and then iron on Pellon Shape Flex, you will have a big problem. Heat will set those blue marks. It will appear as though the blue marks are washing out when you're done, but the blue ink will magically reappear when the background fabric dries. There's also the new Pilot friction pen. This pen disappears when introduced to heat, but reappears when it's cold. If you use a new friction pen to transfer your pattern to a background you intend to line with Shape Flex, another problem will occur. Those marks will all disappear with the heat of the iron when pressing the Shape Flex to the back of the background. And you'll be left with no marks. Now, friction pen marks might come back if you put your piece in the freezer to cool, but then again, they might not. When using iron-on lining, it's best to use a light touch and a fine line mechanical pencil to trace with, or carefully use the Pigma 005 micron pen. Use a micron pen in a similar color to your embroidery floss and don't trace over your lines more than once or you'll have too dark a line. Micron pens are archival quality. They are acid-free, so there are no worries that your marks might eat through your work 25 years from now. So use your new friction pen or water-soluble marker if you intend to use a batik or muslin lining that's basted on. Keep in mind that your friction tracing may reappear if your finished quilt goes on a cold trip like a car ride or a plane trip. The best rule of thumb to follow with this is to test your products and how they work together before you start your stitching. Here's a lovely pillow design I've created called Snow Angels. Look closely to see the hidden angels in the snowflake. I think that only special people can see angels. Are you one of those special people? This pillow is done with a gardenia background from the 1895 Bally watercolor collection. I've used the stem stitch here for outlining, but outlining is even easier using backstitch. We've got some covered buttons here and some folded corners. Here's the adorable Granny's Attic Toy Shop quilt. It measures 43 by 62. Stand outside this Victorian storefront and have a look at an enticing display of antique toys. Bears, dolls, coin banks, fire trucks, puppets, a nutcracker, and a horse and carriage fill the window. If you look carefully, you'll see the acrobatic Mr. Mouse perched on top of the shop sign. His sweetheart, Missy Mouse, is dancing in her tutu in front of the dolls in one of the lower windows. In this quilt, we've used the wrong side of golden-colored 205 Latte from the Hoffman 1895 Batik collection. Now it gives a pleasant antique feel to the quilt. The smaller windows in the Granny's Attic design measure just 8.5 by 11, which is standard letter paper size. And that size is perfect for use with the product's Transfer Ease or Sulky's Sticky Fabric Solvay. Print the stitchery pattern onto the product with your home printer. Peel off the backing paper and stick the product to the right side of your background fabric. I just folded my paper so that it's in quarters, and I have folded my fabric so it's in quarters, so that we are going to get it centered, hopefully. Always good to see somebody in distress. You know that you're not the only one. Okay, so we're going to try and center that up. And adhere it to our fabric. And then you're going to stitch right through that and soak it out with water later. Now, one thing you have to be aware of is that you might need to increase your tension on your stitches because this product does take up a little bit of space between the background fabric and your embroidery floss, and your stitches may be loose when it washes out, so just tighten up a little bit. Don't dismiss the possibilities of using a more intense background color. Hoffman's 1895 watercolor batiks come in deep colors too, so think outside of the box. There's no need to limit yourself to lighter colored backgrounds when stitching. Just aim for a high contrast between the background color and the floss color. So here's an example of that in my pattern called the Noel Advent Calendar. I've used some of Hoffman's seasonal batiks along with number 5 red from the 1895 watercolor collection. Why not live dangerously and use a bold color to set off white embroidery stitches? The Noel Advent Calendar features 25 small pockets, perfect for sweet treats. The stitchery depicts an old-fashioned Christmas with a little Victorian feather tree. Under the tree you'll find a small package, an orange, an apple, and a new puppy, and they're all waiting for that big day. Easy embroidery stitches and simple piecing are used to complete this beautiful heirloom Noel Advent Calendar. Embroidery on colorful batiks gives you a perfect background to work your stitchery magic on, with lots of additional depth and texture. The added thread count that batiks offer is a great canvas for any stitching project and is especially suited to those areas of your pattern that need extra detail like faces, hands, and other fine lines. The color range available to you in the Hoffman 1895 watercolor line is very extensive and is the perfect companion when used with Hoffman's other Valley batiks. By teaming Hoffman California batiks together with the Among Brenda's quilt stitchery patterns, you'll enjoy a wonderfully colorful and winning quilting combination. The friction pen marks did come back in the freezer.